All right, I think we are live now. Hello, hello. Testing. Is there anyone already online? Okay, everything seems to be working from my side. Um, I have the chat next to me, so if anyone is already in any of the channels, let me know. Cool. Hey, Rafrex, from Twitch. Excellent. Alrighty. So welcome to the stream, guys. Today we are going to be doing something new, something slightly um, different from what we usually do in the streams, at least in terms of the type of subject that we usually do. So I'm going to be showing you some of the new brushes that I released a week ago, which is pretty cool. And yeah, hopefully making some kind of like weird alien creature, something along the lines of that Geiger or Beczynski type of mood, which I think is pretty cool. And yeah, so I'm just gonna show you how I would block something like that, and then at which point or how I would use the new brushes to explore shapes and to detail stuff. So hopefully you're gonna find it interesting. And by all means, if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and start with the usual stuff. So I'm just gonna block something out, but again, I'm not gonna start with the usual way of blocking, which for me would be using primitives and scaling them and that sort of thing to place them. Um, this time I'm just gonna use the Sculptris Pro and yeah, just figure out shapes as I go. Um, yeah, nothing too spectacular in terms of the technique here. So I'm gonna use the move brush, and I have symmetry. This is a Dynamesh sphere, um, as you can see. So nothing out of the ordinary here. And what I'll do is I'm just gonna bring this closer. This is gonna be the torso maybe of this whatever creature we do. It's gonna be something weird. We'll see what we come up with. I mean, it's gonna be kind of like a alien or like a humanoid form, but it's gonna be a weird one. So hopefully. But yeah, just with this, what I'll do is let's switch to the snake hook brush, right? And this one obviously works a lot better when Sculptris Pro is enabled, so I can just do that, right? And it creates the geometry as I go. So it's kind of like doing the same thing in a way as, with the move brush, doing this, stretching all the polygons, and then redynameshing to generate the new mesh, right? The main difference obviously is that, as you can see with Dynamesh, you get quads and triangles. It's kind of like a projection like of geometry. But with Sculptris Pro, let's go back here. What we get is kind of like a triangulation of the mesh, but we have the ability to just keep doing this and don't worry about the rest, right? So we'll do that for the blocking. One of the cool things about this process that I'm going to show you is that you can actually mask parts, and that allows you to work on certain areas a lot easier. Instead of just going like this to create legs and arms and the head to create a starfish, you can actually have a bit more control if you mask certain areas. So I'm going to use the mask lasso. Let's do that again. Invert the mask, and that's going to be the starting point for my legs. And I'm going to increase my brush size, push something like that. So now we have a starting point, like I said. Let's go ahead and also turn off perspective. Now I can go ahead and mask the rest, push this back, and keep in mind that as I do this, ZBrush is generating, new mesh or new geometry. Maybe a bit forward. All right. Oops. Clear the mask. Let's do another mask here. So basically, I'm just selecting selecting a section, masking a section, inverting it, and then from there I can extract this part. So it's gonna be some kind of like a goat leg or something like that. not sure. And of course, you can at any point maybe reduce the brush size. And that's another great thing about Sculptris Pro, that it changes or adapts to the geometry size based or the resolution based on the size of the brush. Meaning that if I reduce the brush size, it's kind of like reducing that projection of the mesh that gets created. So you can go ahead and do that. So as you can see, we have now more geometry. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the arms. What would be potentially the arms. And that area that I just erased is basically holding the shift key and smoothing. You're pressing hard to smooth that area. And right now what I'm doing here in order to inflate this and to generate more volume is to hold the shift key to start smoothing and then release the shift key, and that basically smooth out the surface based on this an alternative algorithm that inflates the mesh. So it's the same thing as using this brush right here, the smooth alternative or the smooth alt. So by default, you should have this brush in the shift key. If you select this one, you press the shift key, you don't have to press and release, you get the same effect. I'm just kind of like used to holding shift and then releasing to generate that effect. And if I want to, remove geometry, I just press shift and access the normal smooth. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. All right. So one thing that it's important to keep in mind is that when you use Sculptris Pro to block things out and generally sculpting with Sculptris Pro, you'll notice that it's not necessarily symmetrical, although I had symmetry enabled. So what you can do, let me just add a bit of volume here, is concentrate obviously in one area that is kind of working. Like in my case, the right-hand side is the one that I've been focusing on. And I'm just going to mirror and weld to come back to this symmetrical pose. And this is something that I would definitely do constantly when I'm working with Sculptris Pro, or at least, try to focus on only one side so that I can just mirror and weld it later on at any point. But at this stage, what I can do is now switch back to the move brush and start adjusting the volumes so that it's not this weird looking thing, but something that has a bit more of a, intentionality, I suppose. That's the closest word I can find for this process. It's kind of like a weird starfish thing. Just gonna define the elbows a bit better. Kind of like a pointy elbow, and that's just to help me with a quick retopology that I'm planning on doing. And I'm not entirely sure if I like the tiny body. So another thing you can do is, as well with Sculptris Pro is, let's say, you want to mask an area like this, and you can extend the body. Not sure if I like that either, but you can definitely extend that a little bit. Clear the mask, and then just go over this area with Sculptris Pro enable and smooth it, or press the shift key to smooth that area. So at this point, it's just sketching and figuring things out as you go, but I'm not fully convinced about the shape of this creature so far. So something that we'll have to explore a bit better. Maybe part of the issue, at least for me, would be maybe the legs are too skinny. And the proportions are not working. But again, it's just a matter of yeah, play around with the shapes. This is literally like sketching for me in if I were using just pen and paper, just figuring things out as I go. All right, I think just adding some fingers and defining a bit more the wrist and the hand would help as well. So I'm gonna make like some large fingers. Um, we could use the same approach. We could use Sculptris Pro. So let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, let's use the snake hook brush. So same approach here. I'm gonna go ahead and mask a point. Actually, before I mask, I'm gonna use the size of the brush that I currently have, which is a lot smaller. And I'm just gonna smooth out this area, so that way I have more topology, so that I can mask a bit more precisely. Let's say the thumb here, invert, and then extrude that. Making some weird long fingers. We'll see. Clear that mask. Same deal. Just try to give it a bit of shape before I extrude the other finger. Same deal, using the mask brushes and extrude something new. Not entirely sure where I'm going with this this type of finger, but it's part of the discovery process, I suppose, of blocking this weird stuff. All right. What does welding do? Welding just like literally what the name says, it welds the points. So if you have 2 points that are adjacent, you can weld them together. Don't know if that's the question. I haven't used that at all in here, but yeah. So what if you didn't have a mask? Um, I'm not sure what that means, because you do have a mask. I mean, that's a feature of ZBrush. You don't have to use this process. I mean, you don't have to use this this particular workflow. I don't know if that's the question. Sorry, but you do have mask. It's just that masking makes it everything easier, and you have it by default. So I mean, it is just a feature of ZBrush. So you don't have to use it, but I don't know why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you use it if it's just, makes things a lot easier? But you can just try to do it without it. Definitely, it's not like a requirement for this type of workflow. It's just like, you know, if it makes it easier, why not? So for instance, in this case, that I want to make this finger a bit straighter, like straight, a bit straight, what I want to do is, instead of doing this and try to move it and adjusting it, which I can totally do, it's a lot easier if I just mask the area that I want inverted, and then I can, you know, have a lot more control. So it's not that it's a requirement, like I said, it's just a lot easier. All right. So at this point, you'll see that I haven't actually done any proper sculpting, as in I haven't sculpted anything or worked on any sculpting brush right now. What I'm doing is just either the Move brush or the Sculptress Pro brush. Not the Sculptress Pro, the Snake Hook brush, which works best with Sculptress Pro. That's what I meant. So yeah, just doing a little bit of that, pushing and pulling different points, but this is like the most sketchy thing I can come up with at this point. And what I mean about not having sculpted anything is that for me, sculpting is just, you know, just going with something like the clay builder brush, for example, and start doing this type of stuff. So I haven't done any of that. So what I'll do is just very quickly use the damp standard brush, holding the Alt key, and I'm just gonna try to define some lines in here to, you know, further explore the design of this creature. Like I say, it's gonna be very weird stuff, but I'm gonna try to make it as, you know, similar to like a humanoid form type of thing, or to a degree. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm going for. I might change these completely later on, but for now it's gonna be these. And you know what? Maybe it has like a weird floating hair head. All right. So again, very sketchy, but you'll at least get an idea of what we're going for. um, so what I'll do now is I'm gonna clean this up a little bit. So with a smaller brush size, just smoothing things out a bit, concentrating on the right hand side of the creature. So in this case right now, the left hand side of the screen, so that I can do this mirror and weld and make sure that, you know, I maintain the symmetry. All right, so I'm gonna use the inflate brush as well, just to again add a bit of volume, especially here around the biceps of this creature. Smooth things out. But again, still using the Sculptress Pro. Maybe here for the legs as well. All right, so now that we have this, I can go ahead and use something like the standard brush as well to add a bit of volume, indicating maybe, you know, something like where the muscles might be. This is kind of like starting the sculpting already, but still super sketchy, and you see it's very lumpy at this point. But yeah, it's something that we can start working with. Let me go back here and refine some of these pieces. Again, I think this one will change quite a bit.
I'm going to extend this thumb. You know what? Maybe we can also, let's use the mask brush again and extend this part of the arm. So it's kind of like a flat thing. I don't know. Might be interesting, an interesting part of the anatomy. Okay. Yeah, let's say that we're happy with this. I'm not 100% sure of this whole thing, but as a starting point for the next stage, I think it could work well. Maybe what we need to do is define a bit more the rib cage of this creature, like that. All right. So the next thing for me would be, looking at this from different angles. I definitely need to add a bit more volume to the fingers, because the next process would be to quickly do a retopology of it. And if it is too thin, we will lose a lot of volume. So I think that's fine. Yeah, so that's cool. We're gonna lose a lot of the definition. That's why these brush strokes are pretty, pretty loose. They're just kind of like to help the next process, which is the retopology, to kind of like define certain areas, but it's not gonna be too precise. Like, we're gonna lose a lot of the definition here, and that's why I'm not too worried about any of this lumpiness. Like I said, it's just quick lines to define, certain things. But that's about it. Like, I'm not too worried about the sketchiness of this. Just so that we have a reference. Hang on. I'm gonna duplicate it, and I'm gonna put this in a folder called OR for originals, and just hide it so that we have a reference. Cool. So now that we have this, I'm gonna keep the symmetry on. Let's go to geometry, ZBrush, and I'm gonna go for 5,000 polygons in the polygon count, adaptive on, and let's just ZBrush that. See what we get with a one single click. Should be pretty straightforward. It's not a complicated mesh. All right, not too bad. If you want to have more control over how this topology gets distributed around the fingers, what you can do is either at this point or beforehand, you can define some polygroups. So let me, I'm kind of happy with this. Again, it's very sketchy, and what I'm aiming to do is very sketchy anyway. It's just like having this topology is a lot easier to add details, which is ultimately the goal for today's stream with the new brushes. So I'm happy with this, but like I said, you can have a bit more control. So I'm gonna do just another one to show you. So I have the one that I like in here, and this one, let's go ahead and turn off the line. So this is a single polygroup. What you can do is select the select lasso, holding Control and Shift, and again, let's say I want to loop around this area. I would do something like that, and I will click on Group Visible. Same thing with this. Let's go ahead and do loops around there. Yeah. Just gonna refine this one a little bit. And let's go ahead and do auto groups. So auto groups will create a different polygroup for each finger because they're not touching or there's no connection in the topology. We can also go ahead and do maybe, these ones are gonna be pretty straightforward, but you can do something like that, which, it will create a polygroup around that area, just to refine it a little bit. So auto group there. So you see, it's just giving the series measure like a more, an easier way to follow certain lines. Maybe here, if you want a very precise line as well, what you can do is use the mask pen. Oops, holding Control and just define that area with a mask. Control W, and Control W is just a shortcut to assign a polygroup to any area that you have currently masked. Let's do the same thing for the legs. Let's do an auto group. Yeah, I think that's about it. Maybe if you wanted to, you can do another for, let's say, the torso. If you want to have like, a very specific, I don't need this. I'm just showing you for the sake of, if you want to do it. But yeah, basically doing it like this way, you'll ensure that in the difference between each polygroup, there's going to be a line or a loop once you do the retopology, if you select the keep groups, for example. Now, you can also manually see how this all is all very jagged and weird. You can use something from the deformation palette called the polish by groups. So you can do this, and it will polish the difference between the groups. Obviously, it polishes things a bit as well, but it's mostly for the difference between groups. So that creates an even cleaner line. So going from this to this is pretty good. I'm not gonna do that because this is something that you can automate as well from the series measure, right? So let me just see the chat. When do you break symmetry? Before or after adding first pass of details? It really depends on what you want to do. So I personally don't have like I cannot give you a straight answer because it really depends on the type of creature or project that I'm doing. If the end goal is very asymmetrical, I would try to keep it symmetrical for as long as I can, and because it's just easy and it's faster. But once you move into, let's say, the pose and everything, that's when I would start moving away from the symmetry. In this case, there's no point of doing it asymmetrical at this stage, because all we want is to have a nice base to start adding the details. And when I add the details, then maybe I can show you when. But it really depends on the project. So what I was saying is that this process of retopology can be automated a little bit. So what I'll do is I'm gonna enable keep groups, and when you enable that, by default this smooth groups gets enabled as well, this slider, and this is essentially the same thing as what I just showed you before. So this polish by groups. So this smooth groups automatically is going to polish that difference between the polygroups, so the colors, and it's gonna try to keep the groups, meaning that when the series measure finishes, there's gonna be a loop around these areas. So let's do that just with basically exactly the same thing. The only difference between this and the previous process that I showed you, the previous retopology, is that now we have polygroups and we have enabled keep groups and smooth groups. There we go. So now we have a nicer topology. This one is actually a lot nicer than the previous one, and you can see there are very clear polygroups around the difference of the polypaint, or there's very clear poly loops around the very clear polygroups that we did. So yeah, that's looking good. If anything, we can just help it by smoothing things out a little bit. But yeah, I don't think we need to run any new topology or retopology. I think this is working fairly well. Obviously, there are certain areas that can definitely be improved, but I'm not too worried about it. This is not gonna be an animation or anything. It's a good topology for what we need. Do I ever use the smooth groups brush? Yes, I use it quite often actually. That's something that I use when I'm doing like a more specific retopology. So I would go with the smooth groups and refine the difference between groups before I do this process. It's just that in this case, it's a lot easier to automate it. And of course, now that we have a simpler topology, it's a lot easier to, manipulate these points. So now I wouldn't use the Sculptris Pro. This is just going to be more of these moving points, like tweaking areas, smoothing bits and pieces, and just trying to come up with something that could work nicely for this creature. I'm still not convinced about the hand, but I think going for like a big chunky surface here might be an interesting thing. We just need to define this a little bit better. So just gonna add the knuckles, and right now these are kind of like sausage fingers. So not great, but yeah, we can fix that with a bit of sculpting as well. We might not get a chance to do it in this stream, but I want to have something that looks a bit better. All right. So that's our base mesh. I think we need to work on the volumes a lot more. But it's a starting point. For the head though, I think we can. I'm not very convinced about the arms. Sorry. I'm actually not very convinced about the whole thing, but I'm trying to push through it and see if we can find something interesting that we can work with. Maybe we can maybe we can pose it and do something interesting with it. Let me see the chat. Does ZBrush have a screencast option add-on? I don't know what that means. What's a good way to approach this sort of bizarre anatomical choices? What is some good methodology for really twisting up the anatomy like this? Readable makes sense. Not entirely sure what that means, but I would say that before you can distort the anatomy, you have to understand it a little bit so that it makes it you sort of like kind of grounded and create anchor points or visual anchor points that that makes it believable. So obviously this is not human anatomy or anything like that, but there's certain hints that if you see it even from the distance, you kind of like recognize that it could work. So to give you an example, this area right here, I'm just trying to play it as a kind of like a deltoid. I'm just gonna exaggerate this, right? And then there's the connection here with the pectoral, the biceps, right? And then I have like the rib cage scenario happening here. So I could refine this to be more anatomically accurate, at least closer to a human anatomy. The legs are more of like a deer type of leg, so the knees here, so there's ways to refine it that that makes more sense. I don't know if that's the question, but before you explore, I would say before you exaggerate or distort the anatomy, it's much better to understand exactly how things work in terms of, where certain muscles or the insertion of certain muscles are happening, so that you can replicate it and maybe stretch it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really important to have a good understanding of the anatomy. And I'm not saying that you know, I'm not necessarily great at anatomy. I usually use lots of references when I'm doing something more that needs to be more accurate. But for these type of things, I do have a you know, I'm comfortable with my understanding of anatomy, but it's one of those topics that I keep going on, keep try to study and practice, because yeah, it's very hard. It's a massive topic, anatomy, so it's something that I always go back and either use reference, obviously, and try to study it as much as I can. All right, but I'm not necessarily happy with this thing, to be honest. But we'll move forward. We can concentrate on the head and see if that changes things. So I'm gonna append a sphere. So now this one has more of a character. It's gonna be this kind of weird floating shape of a head. Let's use symmetry. And again, I'm not necessarily knowing. I don't know where I'm going with this, but um, you know, keeping it like very low res at this point is kind of like a good a good way to explore shapes. And I'm just gonna dynamesh this and maybe use the damp standard brush to add some lines. Try to figure this out. So to continue a little bit with that question about the kind of like a workflow for distorting anatomy or playing around with anatomy, weird anatomy like this. Um, in this case, I'm still sort of following a very humanoid form because it's like what I've studied more than any other anatomy, animal anatomy or anything like that. So to give you an example, I do have some references. For instance, one of my cam views, the one that I use, one of the ones that I use the most is this skull that I have here. So as I rotate, I can see, the different angles of the skull. So for example, here, just using this as a reference from this angle, I don't know if you can see, but I've tried to sort of like mimic, let's say, this part of the bone, the zygomatic arc in here, all of that, like the cheekbone, right? Um, this plane for a temporal lobe here on this right hand side. So all of these things, even though it's not anatomically perfect, I'm trying to creating hints to that more realistic anatomy, and that's just to again try to make this more believable, or at least something that you could have an anchor in reality and say, okay, this is something that maybe could exist, even though it's a weird looking creature. How are we doing with time? All right. So I'm going to increase the resolution of this to redynamesh. It's going to solo mode, And I'm just going to smooth all of that. I don't know, maybe the eyes, it's not going to be any, maybe, I don't know, maybe we don't have any eyes on this creature. Again, at this point, all I'm interested in is generating some interesting shapes. But there's gonna be a lot more detailing happening soon, hopefully. And I'm not defining too much the secondary forms, because part of what I want to show you guys is like with the brushes as well. Even though they're meant to be detailing brushes, I can also use them to generate ideas for secondary forms. So one of the things that I would say is when you get to like if you want to detail something, for me at least, is and I think for most people would be defining the primary and secondary shapes is like really important. As in, I wouldn't start detailing something or like high frequency details until all of these shapes that I'm doing here, all of these forms are, I'm happy with them to a degree. Because details, again, they're just gonna add visual interest or visual noise, but they're not gonna change the structure of the sculpture. So if the structure is not right, no matter how cool or how many details you add or how many custom brushes you use, it's not necessarily gonna make it better. It's just gonna sometimes gonna ruin it because it's just gonna add noise. So I would say, yeah, don't jump into details until you're happy with your forms. However, some of the brushes, especially in the recent pack that I created, for me at least, they serve as a way to explore and to further explore these shapes or these secondary forms. So it's something that I would definitely use in this case, rather than getting being 100% happy with all these shapes. I can just rely on the brushes to explore a bit more. So hopefully that would make sense once I get to it and once I use them. So I'm gonna define some kind of jaw here a bit more. But yeah, I think that's plenty. All right. So what I'll do is I'm gonna do a quick pose for this. Not a pose per se, like the final pose, but I'm just gonna change this because right now it's just boring. So let's go ahead and mask or select those ones, mask them. Let's bring in the gizmo. I think just by doing this, it sort of like makes it about a bit more interesting, this creature. I'm just gonna clean this up a little bit. And keep in mind as well that as I do this, even though the topology is a lot cleaner, for me this is still a sketch. So it doesn't matter if I ruin things a little bit, because again, it's just a way to sketch with more control in a way. So maybe just pushing those shoulders back. Maybe we can play with a, some kind of protrusion here for the scapula, kind of like touching there. And start playing around with proportions a bit more. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the legs, to be honest. I'm just gonna delete the legs. Yeah. So instead, what I can do is I'm just gonna bring in a cylinder. So this is what I would usually do for like a more control way of blocking things. Right, and then I'll control. This is gonna be the bottom part of the leg. So nothing fancy, just a couple of tubes. I can just go ahead and do this. I can mirror and weld just to see how it looks, and I think it works better with this type of legs. But let me undo that. Before I do this, I'm just gonna go ahead and smooth things out a bit so that I can place this better. And maybe we actually need some kind of more realistic legs or yeah, different feet for this creature. So let's do that very quickly. So I'm gonna append a sphere. Something like that. And I'm gonna clip using the clip brushes, hold Control and Shift, and I'm gonna clip that around there. Again, it's super sketchy, but that allows me to play around with the shape a bit more. From the bottom, let's just create kind of like the footprint. Again, just keep in mind that this will be kind of like a creature stuff, so just something like that. Which, as a base, it kind of works. Maybe it is definitely too cartoony, so it's just to generate the shape, and then we can do this sort of stuff. But maybe the leg could be thicker. I don't know. So this is the type of things that I like to figure out as I go. But let's go ahead and merge these down. So merge down, okay, and mirror and weld, just so we have a better idea of how this works. All this thing works together, which I think it's looking better now than with the previous legs. So I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead and dynamesh this whole thing. Maybe, hang on. Maybe reduce the dynamesh resolution so that I can smooth things out a lot easier. And I'm gonna use the clay brushes to refine this a bit because it's getting out of hand. It looks like those bell-shaped pants, but we'll work on something so that it doesn't look as weird. I think we just need to increase the thickness of this part. But as you can see, it's a lot of back and forth. Um, Hang on. I think my tablet drivers just died on me. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I was planning to take a quick break anyway. So this is what we currently have. I don't think I'm gonna do a lot of refinement just in terms of the shapes, just because I wanna actually show you the brushes. But it's starting to look a little bit more alien-like and interesting. So what I'll do um, is I'm gonna be back in 2 seconds. I'm gonna restart ZBrush and restart the drivers of my tablet, so that otherwise I'll be using the mouse, which is pointless. And yeah, grab some water and I'll be back. So just give me 5 minutes and I'll be back. All right. Cool. I'm back. So, what I was saying is, I think that I don't want to pay too much attention to this. In fact, as in not paying too much attention, but what I mean is don't concern too much about the secondary forms at this stage, because again this is very sketchy. The zero measure was just to simplify forms, but I can do a quick sculpting and redynamesh of this. Let me just complete this area. Again, just to give it a bit more form. I just want to tweak this a little bit because right now they just look like tubes. All right. I'm just trying to figure out how these could work all together, but I think I'm gonna leave it as it is, and then just start working on the details, or not the details, but like using the brushes to further explore some shapes. So what I'll do is I'm gonna combine these two together. Hang on, I just keep like saying that I'm gonna do something new, but as I work on this and refine it, I figure things out. So I just want to go back and deal with those things before going further into details. And I guess that's kind of like my second nature is to always focus on forms first before detailing. So it's hard to sort of get out of that habit of saying like, okay, this is fair enough, this is good enough to start working on details, just because of that thing that I kind of like try to do every single time with every sculpture, uh, or any concept. But in this case, I want to show you the difference. Anyway, let's go ahead and merge these two together. So the body and the legs merge down. Okay, and I'm gonna use actually no, let's split it. So again, split hidden, just because I want to have this at the similar level of refinement. So if I take the body and divide it a little bit, that should do the trick. Yeah. So this is just a subdivided mesh, like a zero measure. You're going to demo in your Beczynski brushes. Yes, that's what I'm trying to get at. I just been trying to get something a bit more interesting before we get into that. But yeah, for sure, that's the idea. All right, so let's do that. Let's merge these now. So I just wanted to have like these two pieces kind of like at similar levels of subdivision, and now we can go ahead and dynamesh the whole thing. And in fact, let's just go for a lot more resolution. Just double check that the connection here between the legs and the body, there's no holes or gaps, and just a quick refinement of the forms here. So again, just so that they are connected or they feel connected. All right. Cool. I think that's that's a decent starting point for the brushes. I mean, the hands are I don't know. I feel like they're a little bit ridiculous, to be honest. So I'm not sure if I will keep them. But maybe after playing around with the brushes, they might suggest something interesting. Um, we'll see. All right. So let's start with this as a base. So I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate that and keep the original in the folder. Duplicate the head as well and put it in the folder. I'm gonna put all of that in this folder. And the head, I'm just gonna let me double check. Yeah, just gonna increase the resolution of Dynamesh and do that. And the body should have enough resolution at least to get us started. Maybe a bit more. So 4 million polygons, that's plenty for the details. All right, cool. So the brushes. Here we go. So these are the brushes from the Beczynski and the Geiger pack. So just in case you don't know what I'm talking about or what this is, I'm gonna go ahead and share a link with you guys in the chat. This is basically what I'm talking about. The Geiger Beczynski tribute brushes pack for ZBrush. So it's a pack of brushes that I developed for creating this creepy surreal style that I really love, based on two of my favorite artists, H.R. Geiger. You probably know him from things like Alien and defining that universe of Alien and stuff like that. And Beczynski is a Polish painter that dwells into this dystopian surrealism. It's amazing. Just in case you don't know who those artists are, so this is kind of like a tribute pack that I did for those artists, of based on the body of work that they created. So the brushes in the pack are to simulate things like these are the brushes that I'm going to show you right now, but it's just to simulate similar patterns and similar details to those that you'll find in the work of Geiger and Beczynski, basically. So these are a bunch of like different works that I've done, some of the patterns that you generate with the brushes. So yeah, the idea is to show you how I would apply those brushes, how I use the brushes, and a little trick that I actually shared with my email subscribers today. So before the stream, I actually sent an email today on how I like a cool trick to enhance details. So I'm going to show you that hopefully very quickly today. But yeah, so these are the brushes. Let's go ahead and start playing around with some of those. So one of my favorite brushes, and I use it all the time now, is this membrane 2 and the membrane wall. So what these ones do, if I click on that one, is generate these weird looking patterns. But you know, it is a sculpting brush. It does have an alpha, so it is using an alpha, but it's using a lot of the settings in ZBrush, like the depth, the pinching, a whole bunch of different things to allow you to very easily sculpt through the model. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and maybe work with this brush towards generating some interesting details. One of the brushes that I use as well all the time with any of these brushes is the smooth brush, the smooth pick brush. So if I hold, well, no, I don't need to hold it, but click on smooth picks. When I hold the shift key, now this is the new brush. That means that when I do this and then I go ahead and smooth it, it only is going to smooth the peaks of the brush. So anyway, that's kind of like what I'm getting at. So I'm going to start by playing around with this brush and generate some patterns here as I smooth things out. And that creates this weird membrane stuff, which I really like. But one of the hardest things I think with the brush, with this brush pack, is that it is a very cool set of patterns what you can generate, and it's really easy. So the hardest part is just to know when to stop, and you know, so that not everything has the same level of details, if that makes sense. That's why I always say that the secondary forms are super important. But I'm just gonna use these brushes to indicate certain patterns, right? So something like that. Now I can go ahead and use something else, like for instance, let's go. Where is it now? I think this one, membrane connected. Yep. Either the sharp wall or the membrane connected. This one is a bit better for this type of thing, because it just generate this pattern and then you can just sort of like go over the same area and it feels connected. So that's a cool way to, you know, produce patterns. This other one is a little bit stronger, and it's just to create kind of like a wall. So this one could be an interesting one to place around here. And again, just going with the smooth brush, the smooth picks to simplify it. And of course, you can vary the size of the brush, and just by changing the size of the brush, that immediately changes things quite a bit. Or you can hold the Alt key and, you know, generate like the opposite effect of the brush. This one is a little bit too strong, so there's an actual brush that gives you that inverted effect. This one right here, the cutter. So that's a cool brush to generate these weird like teeth, or I don't know. It's all of these brushes, they're kind of like hard to describe the effect. It's just very weird and surreal patterns. Oh, at least that's what I think. But yeah, they're kind of hard to describe exactly what they do. It's just better to play around with them. But what I'm trying to say with this, I mean, I'm placing these in a specific locations. Not that I have a plan or anything, but if you look at the sculpture, there are like certain lines that I'm trying to maintain and detail, and certain areas that are more like softer and polished. So that's kind of like what I'm getting at. I might probably add more details, definitely, but just as a starting point, I like to keep a good balance between these sort of areas of interest or with patterns and areas of rest. So I quite like this one to add, kind of like create a rupture of the sculpture, if that makes sense. Um, but again, these ones are, to me, they're details, but they're also indications of things that I can do to further refine the secondary forms, right? So for instance, let's add a few more of these brushes. So these organic cracks, I use that one quite a bit as well. It just generate this let me show you an example here of what these do. These brushes, this pattern does. It just creates a crack that is very organic. It's not a harsh crack like a rock type of thing. It's just very soft, like pinching, maybe like sewing through organic matter or something like that. So this one is a good one to extend some of these lines with the other brushes. So the lines that were created with the other brushes, I could just go ahead with this one and extend certain things like this, and that's just gonna generate a pretty interesting connection between the previous patterns. And hopefully, once I finish this, placing these initial shapes or initial, again, let's call it details for the sake of it. But once I finish doing that, I can show you how we're gonna integrate all of this, which I think is the cool part about it. So there's a couple more brushes that are quite interesting. So for instance, this membrane is the same thing, but it has different settings, and it has an inverter effect. So you can do this type of thing and create like a weird connection, and then just use the smooth brush to finalize it. I wasn't trying to go for that, but it's interesting, so let's just keep it. So you can generate veins and things like that with this brush. Other brushes, for example, like this membrane, this one is really cool. Is it this one? Hang on. So there's two of these. One of them, I can't remember which one it is. Membrane wall, I think. Membrane wall 2. I think it's this one. No, it's the previous one. So all of them will generate different cool patterns. This one works with here we go. So this brush works with speed and direction and like pressure. So if I go like very very slow, as you can see, it just generates this weird membrane pattern like that. But if I go ahead and do it faster, it sort of like stretches the alpha, or like it basically smudges the alpha as you go. So it's kind of like that idea of the double action brushes that I did a while back. So this one is really cool to generate a bit more of visual interest in certain areas without completely altering the surface. So maybe for this part of the arm, something like that. So again, these are very specific for a specific, I would say, specific look, or generating a specific look and feel. But things like this, like if you think about it, this membrane could be used to create like the burn flesh effect for another type of creature. So it's just the way, at the end of the day, they're just tools like anything else. So it's how you use them, what's important, I think. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to use another pattern. So for example, this pattern 6. Some of the ones that say they have the word pattern in it, they're just to create interesting patterns. So for me, that one I would use this one. No. Oh no, I thought I lost my drivers again. So this one, I would use it to add visual interest in certain areas. So maybe, again, I think I'm gonna get rid of the fingers at some point because just they're not working for me. They're too blobby and weird. So I might just change that with something else. You know what? Let's just change that now, very quickly. As in, I think I'm just gonna merge them together and create like a weird, something weird. Why not? Let's just do that quickly, and then we come back to the rest. So I'm gonna mask that area, bring in the gizmo, and then use the move brush to place them all together. So yeah, so it's gonna be now a creature that doesn't have any fingers. It's just gonna be a weird hand. And again, this is kind of like how organic this process is for me of designing. Just decided that this is how it's gonna be now. And that's, again, this is just an idea that came up, that came out just by these other details that I was placing. And I'll show you why in a second. So something like that. And of course, so that it sort of feels like there's still like a hand in there, but it's more like a scoop thing. I don't know. So we can play with that, the kind of like the curvature of this a bit more, and exaggerate things even further. So I think that that works. That works well. And like I said, this was something that I knew was going to change over time eventually. So I'm happy that I I get to show you that transformation. We definitely have to work on the legs a bit more, but I think we are getting to a much more interesting shape for this creature. And remember, we still have this as a dynamesh. So what I'll do is with the inflate brush, I'm just gonna inflate that to sort of connect this a bit better. And these lines for the connection, we're gonna exaggerate them a little bit more with the brushes. So let's go ahead and redynamesh the whole thing. We're gonna probably lose a bit of the details from the brushes, not too much. And yeah, let's use the clay brush now. Sort of clean this up so that it has an indication like, okay, there could be fingers in here, but not really. Or it's kind of like an evolution of those fingers there. All right, so yeah, I'm happy that I could show you that the evolution process of this design. This is something that usually, I mean, in these streams, I tend to or try to show you that entire process, but this is something that usually happens over multiple iterations, and we don't really have much time to do that in the streams. But in this case, I think following this type of workflow, it's a good way to demonstrate that. I'm gonna make this a bit more pointy. All right. So the other reason I did that for this creature, now I just want to go back to the head and maybe extend this a bit more. Again, just to make it fit the design a little bit better. But anyway, what I was saying is that now that we have these weird arms, these weird pieces, what we can do is utilize some of the other brushes, like these wrapped directional bones. This one is pretty cool. It sort of like suggests the, you know, like a continuation of bones, which is pretty cool. So I'll use that one to suggest how these kind of like fingers merged into one thing around this area. And of course, smooth things out. It could be more than one. Why not? But yeah, let's see the chat and see if if I can show you something else. No worries. Glad that you like the brushes. How to get those details 100% after retopology with a projection. So you can just retopologize and then project those details. You just need to have enough resolution in the base. Or you can just keep these, you can do the retopology and you can keep this as a sketch and then just export that as a high-res mesh if you can, and then just bake those details. There's many ways. Well, not many ways, but there's like a few ways to do it. How can you give us details about how you created these brushes? Sure. I mean, a lot of these brushes, I created them based on my needs, as in what I wanted to achieve in my projects. So let me give you an example. I think I have it open. So this one, for example, oops. Again. So if you go to my ArtStation, um, this is one of the pieces that I originally started creating for the brushes. So basically, I wanted to do something like that, like a Beczynski inspired type of thing. So this is the sculpture in ZBrush. I wanted to achieve something like that for the, like an illustration type of thing. So I started building the brushes to achieve certain patterns that I want to create. So that's the kind of like first step of how I create the brushes. Like, what do I need and what I can kind of like speed up the process. So I had like an idea in mind, and obviously heavily influenced by Beczynski in this case, or Geiger for those like weird alien shapes. So I started to look and research for the patterns that I wanted to create. That's kind of like the first stage, collecting references, having like a project that I can test things out in, or test the brushes in, which is this case is that one. And then more practically, I basically went through the process of building the brushes, or trying to figure out whether the brushes were the right ones. And I'll show you why, what I'm saying. Share a link. So this link I'm gonna share with you guys, it's a tutorial in my YouTube channel. I'm planning to do a few more of these. So just go to that link. And to be honest, I'll be honest with you, my YouTube channel, I haven't enabled any monetization or anything, and it keeps showing ads for some reason. It shouldn't. I don't understand why, to be honest. That's the type of things that I was sort of like staying away from YouTube for a while, but anyway. So yeah, that this YouTube video, I don't know why it's showing ads. It shouldn't. Like I'm not, if this is something to monetize the channel, I'm not getting anything from it because it's not enabled. Anyway, so this is a tutorial where I show you actually how I bit by bit develop a brush. So it has the whole thinking process, the process and the step by steps of what are the different settings that I usually tweak to generate a new brush. And at the end, I showed you kind of like this. It's to create like a scarring brush for skin. Anyway, you can have a look at that. That's basically the process, so that I don't bore you with the step by steps in here. All right, so now that I have this, I'm gonna go ahead and use a few other patterns, like this pattern 8. This one is a very subtle one, and I like to use that one to sort of like stretch over certain areas that are a little bit more flat, like here, for example. So it just creates this kind of like stretching marks. And it also depends on how this brush is cool, because it depends on the pressure that you applied, but it also depends on the variation in volumes that you have. So if I do this, yeah, it's hard to explain. Like I said, some of these brushes is better to just open them up and try them, try them yourself and see what they do for you. But yeah, it would depend on the pressure that you applied, and also on the depth of the previous details, let's say. So this one is kind of like a good general purpose detailing brush, just to add a few details in areas that are not, you know, not very detailed, but you want to keep them or bring them to a similar level of polish to the rest of the sculpt. All right, so once I have something like this, again, these are details, let's call it details, but they're also ways to further refine the secondary forms. So once I have something like that, instead of going and trying to add more details and stuff like that, I can use something like the clay brush, for example, and start working based on the suggestions of the details of the brushes. So for example, here I can just take these bumps and sort of like start refining them a little bit better and extend them as well. So it creates these like more refined bones, if anything. Right, so this is the usual sculpting for me, but I have this nice base of, yeah, again, suggested details or forms that I can take advantage of. So I have that suggestion of, the flow. I have these lines and certain things that I can work on. But for example, here I can, if you look at the visual cues, let me just bring this. Um, I'm gonna bring in my Epic pen. Here we go. So this is just to give you a bit more of an insight into what I'm thinking about design when I'm doing this stuff. So these brushes, and this is another reason why I created these brushes in this specific way. They're not just alphas that you click and drag to generate details. They're actually directional brushes, so you can have control over the flow of those details. So this is just a quick reference to what I'm thinking as I place these details. There is a sense of directionality in these lines, right? So they're kind of like moving this way, those details, and it might not be as evident, but that helps me control and frame certain portions of the design. But they also have, these smaller lines that are kind of like perpendicular, and that's kind of like what I'm doing with, as I refine these details. That's kind of like what I'm trying to achieve, a bit of contrast between the main sort of, you know um, the main dynamism of the forms, and what I'm doing. So these refinements that I'm doing, these volumes, are kind of like perpendicular to those visual cues of that sort of like flow of the sculpture, created with the details or the brushes, right? So for example, I can, take this line and refine it or exaggerate it. So there is obviously a, let's say, the primary form of this deltoid now, like the shoulder, right? I would say is just defined by these lines, right? So it's kind of like a triangle like this, and it has the flow of the lines and of the initial shape and that sort of thing. And then you have these perpendicular lines, blah blah blah, that I just mentioned. But you also have, in the biggest form, in the primary shape, you also have this suggestion of kind of like a plane, right? So this one is this area right here, and then you have this other plane, so with white, which is this one right here. So these are the type of like little visual cues, again, that I'm looking for when I refine these details. So I could take, let's do another color just to make it more complicated. So I'm looking for, let's say, this sort of visual line, right, to refine, and to add more emphasis on. So again, to give you an example, is just I have that line, so I can take this detail again that was sort of like randomly generated, by the brush, and then I can just work on this bit, and that gives me the opportunity to refine, that you know refine and enhance that visual line, that I was talking about. for that primary shape. So this is, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the reason why I said these brushes are either for detailing, which are originally intended for, but the details that they generated, they can be used quite easily as ways to explore, secondary and primary shapes, like I just did in this case. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the idea with what I'm showing you. So again, it's just utilizing those bumps that were generated, and try to capitalize on the idea of, it's kind of like randomizing something, or generating something that is very random in a way, um, and then utilizing that as the starting point. The good thing about this is that it's not necessarily random, as in it's not completely made up, because you have the ability to decide what's the direction that you want to give to these brushes. That's kind of like what I like about them. All right. So any other question, guys? Otherwise, I think, yeah, we still have time to show you a few more refinements that you can generate with these brushes, and some of the details, not details, the detailing technique that I promise. All right, so another one of my favorite brushes of this pack is their general purpose ones. So you can have, actually, this one, these wrapped tubes, this one is pretty cool because it's very strong and it generates this sort of like tube that is wrapped around pieces. So this one would be an interesting one. I don't know if it would fit this sculpt, so I probably wouldn't use this detail, but it's definitely something that is really cool to try on. The ones that I was referring to are these, like the HR Geiger cutter, the cutter pinch, the standard, and the standard strong. So I'm gonna start with the cutter. So this cutter is like I think it's based on the slash brush. So you can, if you don't, I mean, you don't have to get this pack obviously, but if you don't get this pack, you can use something like the slash brush, slash 3 brush. That's a pretty useful one. And you can create something similar just with the damp standard brush as well, and increasing the strength of it. But this one, it just cuts through the model like quite deep, and it maintains the volumes a little bit. So that one is, and you can override certain details, so you can go like that, and it changes things dramatically. So this one is a great brush to refine things like that, just very deep cuts. So again, it's just another way to um, either refine details or explore, other patterns here for the secondary forms. So I would, again, this brush is in the category of general purpose or miscellaneous brushes, because you can use it for any type of creature or skull that you're working on. Doesn't have such a specific pattern as the other ones, so it could be, yeah, it could be anything. Um, but it is part of this pack because I think it is one of the best ways to refine certain details like I'm showing you right now. So any of the existing brushes or any of the existing patterns created by the brushes, you can go ahead and use the cutter, and kind of like sharpen the details. And because it's very strong as well, it is also a good option or a good opportunity to redefine or yeah, enhance, like I said, the flow of the sculpt, or like the lines that you have already created. So for instance, those lines, those visual cues that I mentioned before, I can go ahead and do a couple of these lines like that just to refine it. Not sure if I like that one, but hopefully you know what I mean. And I haven't worked on the back much, so maybe we can use this brush to accentuate some of these cuts. So yeah, this one is kind of like refining everything using um, yeah, this area I haven't touched much, so I use a different brush, like using the damp standard brush, but it's a lot stronger and it overrides the details quite a bit. So it's very useful in that sense. Still have to work on this weird shape for the feed, but you know what? Maybe let's do something quickly. I'm gonna use the clay brush. Actually, let's use the trim dynamic. I just figure a different way of presenting this. Hopefully, it's gonna work. So I'm gonna create like weird sort of stumps. Rather than, feed. And I think that could be an interesting shape that wouldn't fight as much with the rest of the sculpt. Yeah, I think that works better. You can sort of suggest a tiny bit of curvature again, just to, again, if I treat like a creature or a character as a composition, there's also certain things that I like to, at least at this point, to keep in line or to keep in mind, like the lines of action. And again, that's why I have like certain things sort of pointing in certain direction. Uh, Obviously, this is going to change if I pose the character or if it's in motion, but uh, as I define and design this, I think it's important to keep those things in mind. Let me just do a quick save just in case. You should show some of the noise from the pack. Pattern 16 is my favorite. Ah, cool. Thanks, man. Um, yeah. So the noise maker patterns. Yeah, I can show you that. Let me just I'll show you that, and also, like I said, the detailing technique that I keep going on about. That shouldn't take too long. Just want to refine this a tiny bit more, showing you another brush, the standard brush, the standard strong. So this one is obviously based on the standard brush, but it has certain settings and a different alpha. It's a standard alpha that comes with ZBrush, but it has certain settings that make it a lot easier to work on these specific patterns. So because I changed this thing, In fact, let's just polish it a bit more with the clay brush. So yeah, because I did that and I changed this quite a bit, the topology here is a little bit rubbish. So I'm just gonna redynamize the whole thing. And we still have, well, 3 million polygons. I think we can push it a bit higher if we want to create smaller details, but I think we are okay in terms of the size. Let's undo that, and I'm gonna increase that tiny bit. So it should be around 4 million polygons, I hope. Yeah, 3 million, that's fine. So the brush that I was talking about, already loaded. This is standard brush. So this is a great brush to, for example, go ahead and do these type of patterns, just to refine edges maybe. But again, it's just a very strong version of the standard brush that gives you a bit of control in certain things. So this one is very, very close to the normal standard brush. So you can achieve similar results by changing the alpha and changing the intensity as well. So like I said, this is one of the brushes in the pack that is very, it's part of the miscellaneous brush, like general purpose ones. So yeah, I like to use this to produce more of intentional custom patterns like this one right here, but again, that are sort of part of the overall design of the sculpture or the concept that was generated by the other patterns. So what I'm saying with this is, now that I have the base and the idea, thanks to the other brushes, I can use this one to refine my own sort of patterns a bit more manually, but again, similar, trying to maintain the similar visual language as the ones generated with the other brushes. Yeah, I'm just talking now, so not sure if that makes sense. All right. Maybe this line could be accentuated a bit more and connected here at the back. But yeah, so lots of fun to have with this pack of brushes and discover what you can achieve with this. I would say the key is not to go overboard, because again, it's very easy to generate lots and lots of details, and for the most part, like all the patterns are pretty cool, I think. So the hardest part is not just adding the details. The hardest part is not going overboard with the details. um, and you can obviously make use of the brushes that come with ZBrush to, or like the standard brushes, to refine your sculpt. So all of this is just, I'm trying to show you as many of the brushes as I can, but it doesn't mean that that's the only set of brushes that I would use at this point. Like, for example, this area right here, it is very obvious that it's a pretty well-defined line, but I can go with the clay brush that comes with ZBrush. This is not a custom brush or anything, and I just refine that sort of transition in here, like so. So it's more about, seeing where those brushes can help you speed up the workflow, generate ideas, experiment. But then, you come back to some of the standard brushes or the ones that come with ZBrush and refine the skull, because ultimately that's one of the reasons why they come with ZBrush, because they're already pretty pretty good to do this type of thing. So it's just a combination of those. The brushes in the pack is just to explore, generate ideas, and get you somewhere faster than if you do it manually. Like probably, if I were to do this manually and try to explore the designs of this manually, it would probably take me a long time, or longer than this. Whereas in this case, it's not. We have something interesting in just an hour or so since we started kind of like doing the details. So let me do a quick save of this project, and I think it's looking good. Well, I'll continue working on this if I kind of like this concept. But I want to show you the other technique. So I'm gonna use a sphere just for the sake of it, and let's divide this a few times. So this sphere has 2 million polygons. That should be enough. And let's load a brush like this one. Yeah, this one should do the trick to create some weird stuff. Let me just see the chat first. Hey Nezumi, how you doing? Thank you. I wonder if there's some place I can see the madcaps bundled at this madcaps bundle in this pack. Yeah. Where do I have that? I think it's in the ZBrush guides actually. Let me share it with you. So if you go to the ZBrush guides website, to obviously, if you go to the ZBrush guides, the first kind of like image that you'll see is the link to this. So if you go to, this is the awesome things, the awesome work that Dominic Queck did with the brushes. I'm pretty sure you know Dominic. His work is amazing. So he actually used some of the brushes. He helped me to test this pack. So he did some of this some of his work that he actually mint as NFTs recently with the brushes pack. And in his Twitter, he actually tweeted about these projects, and he pointed at which brushes from the pack he used, in case you're interested. But yeah, so it's pretty cool stuff. So if you go here at the bottom where it says what's in the pack, there should be an image. There we go. Oh, this is the Noisemaker. I think it's in here. Yeah. So these are the kind of like examples of the madcaps that come with the pack. But again, those are just bonuses, that something that I was testing out and I created for my projects that I kind of like. So that's why I included them. But it shouldn't. I don't think it is the main reason for getting the pack. They're just like additional stuff, like the Noisemaker. So let me just show you the Noisemaker thing. So on the surface palette, if I click on Noisemaker, these are all the ones that come with the pack, and basically they have patterns already pre-established. So I can just double click on this, and it generates the pattern, right? And obviously you can change the color. Let's say the bottom area I want it to be like pretty harsh red, deep red, and then click on edit and change the color here as well, right? And it comes with all these pretty fine settings, but you can tweak them, right? You can increase the strength, you can change the alpha or scale the alpha, you can tweak this profile curve, so you can completely change things. Let's say I like this one. If you want, you can just go ahead and apply to mesh. It'll take a while, and now we have those sort of like details already established there with just the surface noise. But there's a bunch of those, like 35 of those. And yeah, so that's just the Noisemaker. So you can have, you can double click on the Noisemaker and try all sorts of different patterns that are pretty cool. And all of those patterns, again, they're just bonuses, but they're well generated with the brushes. So you could potentially use the brushes, obviously, to generate those patterns and tweak them yourself. But yeah, so that's the idea. Now the trick that I was going to show you is how to utilize some of the tools in ZBrush already to generate some interesting patterns based on the different effects of the brushes. So for example, if I take this membrane brush and do this, obviously you can create this weird looking stuff and then again smooth. That's how we started with the previous skull that I just showed you. But the trick here is to fill the object with whatever color you want and then use a bright color, let's say green in this case, and enable RGB in case the brush doesn't come with RGB enabled. So when you do this, you actually paint. Obviously, you also have to have the alpha paint with alpha enabled, but this is kind of like the default in ZBrush. So what this allows you to do is add details at the same time that you paint kind of like the highest points of the details, because that's in the alpha, those are the widest points. Yeah, the highest points in ZBrush will be the widest points in the alpha in this case. So yeah, so you can just go ahead and do something like that. I'm pressing with different intensities and generate this weird membrane pattern stuff that also has this this color. So the next thing that I would suggest, like once you add your details like this, is to create a mask from it so that you can tighten everything a little bit more and generate something a bit more interesting. So let's, I'm gonna delete lower and just dynamesh this whole thing. Maybe add a bit more resolution so I get similar amount of points. Yep. So it's similar amount of resolution, but I moved from subdivision to dynamesh so that I can push things a little bit more and don't it doesn't distort things. But now I have this color, and using the mask by Polypaint, which you'll find under the masking palette, on the mask by color. So in the masking subpalette, mask by color, you can click on mask by Polypaint. That would bring this palette, and you can click on these swatches and drag it to the color you want, like in this case the green, and play with the tolerance, right? So I can do something like that, right? Click OK. So that automatically, if I show you the flat version, that sort of masks out the color, right? And you can go ahead and adjust that mask. So I'm going to reset that and maybe cover less, right? So I just blurred things a little bit to adjust that mask, and I can go ahead and invert it now. So only the green areas of the details are on mask, right? So this is really cool because we can go ahead and hide the mask. So the mask is still there, but I'm just hiding it so that it's easy to see what I'm going to do. You can also turn off Polypaint now. We don't really need it. So we have a mask based on just those details, right? And you can also save a morph target and use layers. So you have all these different ways of controlling these details. But this one is really cool because then we can take the deformation palette here, and we can go ahead and inflate things a tiny bit, maybe 2, and then do the same thing again, and maybe one more time, right? And then clear that mask and redynamesh the whole thing, right? And then we can use the smooth peaks to smooth just the top areas. But you see how intricate and complicated this already looks just by having that mask or working on the mask. And this is a mask that is generated by the details. You can use any of the brushes in this pack to follow the same workflow and produce this type of stuff. Not only that, if you're sort of thinking that, okay, this looks interesting, but I'm losing a lot of the definition in the details, you can use a brush in ZBrush. You have delta and target. So contrast delta and contrast target. Contrast delta is going to target the highest points more. The contrast target is the one that I would use because it respects the smoothness of the highest points of the details, and it just focuses on the inside, right? So you can do this, and as you can see in this area, it sort of like sharpens those details. So all it does is take what is already there, and it just sharpens all of that, which is cool. So I'm just sharpening these things. right? I'm gonna redynamize the whole thing again, and you can smooth things out. Now I'm gonna use one more brush just to wrap up today's session, and I'll show you. It's one of my favorite brushes of the pack, or the one that I used that helped me to do quite a few things. This one right here is called the ZB pattern strong, and this is just a pattern that is really strong, but it has some settings that respect kind of like the depth of the details. So this is a brush that I would use to fill in these gaps in here. So I can just use this to do that. Maybe not as strong, right? And it creates this weird looking pattern. So it doesn't mean that it won't create the details everywhere. It's just that if you start in the deep areas, it sort of like respects that a lot more. So for example, here, if I start here in this area, it's just gonna do like what any other brush would do, right? Like just override those details. But if I start in this deep or this detail that is like a crevice or like a crater, it will respect that line of, yeah, a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the best way I can put it. It would respect some of the highest points if you start adding the detail in the, yeah, in the lower ends of the details. I don't know how many times I've used the word details in this stream, but it would be an interesting one to go back and see. All right, so yeah, lots of details. Once again, lots of patterns in here with this brush. But again, you can use the smooth brush or the smooth picks to refine it. And not only that, you can also come back with other brushes like pattern brushes, for instance. Let's try pattern 6. And just add, further details just on the surface of that. But look how complex and weird this looks for a for a quick pass of details, just using that technique. So it's all about that masking technique. And something else that once you get to this point and you have the details already, something you can do is mask by, cavity, for example. So you can click on mask by cavity, and ZBrush will target all of those cavities in here, right? And again, you can adjust that mask to blur it a little bit and maybe invert that, right? And then use the inflate effect to just, instead of going up, so like you go into the negative values to sharpen things even further, right? Clear the mask. And there we go. And of course, this is just, again, like a more automated way of sharpening details and stuff like that. But there's also this brush, this membrane. No, actually, I was going to show you the cutter one more time, because like I said, this one it just cuts really deep into the model. So it's a good way to go and refine what you already have, and make it a bit more intentional. But this looks kind of like, yeah, some bones interconnected with each other, which is pretty cool. Look at this area; it's pretty complex. Even if you plan it, you probably won't get something as cool as this, I think. And it's just taking advantage of, the features that you already have in ZBrush and some of the effect of the brushes. Cool. So that's pretty much it. Let me just finalize everything by bringing in some of the matcaps, so you have that as a reference. I don't have them with me now. Huh. All right, doesn't matter. I don't have them. I'll have to find where I put them actually. But the other thing I was going to show you. Oh yeah. So another cool thing about this. Let me go back to the sculpt that we were working on. right? Regardless of the matcap that you use or the material that you use to pre-visualize these details and all of that, if you enable under the render palette, let's put that on the side. Under the render palette, if you go to preview ambient occlusion, if you enable ambient occlusion, it just makes everything looks better immediately, especially for these type of creatures. So you have this ambient occlusion in preview mode. So as you sculpt, you generate that ambient occlusion. So as I do this, this is all, thanks to the ambient occlusion. So it looks pretty cool. So yeah, it's just another way to visualize nicely these details, and you can tweak the quality, the intensity, the main radius. All of that is just to sort of like blur things out a little bit. But yeah, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can use these brushes, or in general, like how to set up a creature or a new project. So yeah, hopefully have fun with that. And if you make something with these brushes, feel free to tag me in social media so I can have a look at it and reshare it. But yeah, so hopefully this gives you an idea, not just about the brushes, but in general the workflow that I use to explore shapes with these brushes. Cool. So if there's no questions, last minute questions, I will leave it here. Cool. All right then. So have a good one, and I'll see you next in a couple of weeks. Bye, guys.